The laundry and haircuts are only the week of Tisha B'Av. So the Gemara goes on. What about meat? The Mishnah doesn't mention anything about nothing about meat, nothing about music. So, okay, later in the Gemara on when the Gemara discusses the Mishnah, so it discusses the famous thing about if a person has a din with a nachri, if a person has a court case with a non-Jew, right? So the Gemara says, Rav Papa says, Bar Yisrael Islay Dina Bahari Nachri, if you have a court case with a goy, L'shtamit Minei Ba'av, then push it away from the month of the Riyah Mazle, because Av is a bad mazel. The Limtzah Nashabada, and you should try to push it off till Udder, the Bari Mazle, because Udder is Bari Mazle. And based on that, right away, that's the first halacha in Shulchan Aruch, in Taf Guf Nun Aleph, that if a person, the Mechaber records that, if you have a din with a kusi, with a non-Jew, you should try to mishtamit and push it away from Av. So although it mentions that that's from Av, but we know the Rebbe mentioned if a person has an elective medical thing that they need to do, so it's better not to do it in the whole 3 weeks, as we'll speak about, because the whole time of the 3 weeks is Zman of Puranos. We're going to mention that at the last sif in the Siman. But it says if you have a din with a goy, so there's an interesting sefer, something interesting right away, called, where did I put it? So there's a sefer called by Rav Harfinus, which is a dayan in Williamsburg. And he says, what happens if a person has a meeting to see if he can get a welfare meeting? Maybe, what is it, Centerlink? Are you allowed to do, and unfortunately this might be Corona related. I'm trying to connect things to Corona because we need a lot of people need a big bracha with parnasa, and we're going to give a bracha to everyone. There should be parnasa bar chava for everyone, right? Only Todah Nigla Nigla, but unfortunately, it's that's the situation right now for many people, and so you're allowed to deal with would be preferable to push it off. So he says, this Rav Harfinus in his sefer, that it only says if you have a din with a nachri. In other words, a person, you're going up against a goy, and so the goy's mazel, he's got a strong mazel. However, he says, if you're going for a meeting with the welfare, or in here it would be with the government to see about one's eligible or not. So that's not a din with a goy. You're not up against a goy. They're trying to be mavar the metzias. They're just trying to see, is he eligible? Is he not eligible? So he says that one would be allowed to do that. So too, he says one would be allowed to go for a driving test. So when it comes to those in Yanam, that is not included, he says, in the bad mazel of Av. So that's the first halacha that it does mention about Av. Goes on. Okay, so then it goes on about meat. Where do we have the restriction of meat mentioned? So the Mishnah mentions a machloikas tanaim, what restrictions apply on Erev Tisha B'Av, right? And so speaks about not having meat by the Suda Mafsekes on Erev Tisha B'Av. The Gemara goes on, the maskana of the Gemara's conclusion is what's restricted. Technically, you're allowed to have meat on Erev Tisha B'Av. The only thing is if this, by the Suda Mafsekes, the last meal you're having, if you're having it after midday, after Chatzos, then you should have meat, but you could have meat before that. And it's not even all meat, it's only a basar that would be kosher for the shlamim, which would be good for a carbon shlamim, which is within 2 days and 1 night. But it says if it's basar maliach, if it's meat which was salted, which it's not fresh, then there's no restriction, and you're not supposed to have wine as well. But yain toisus, the wine which is in the fermenting process, beginning the first 3 days of the fermenting process, that's also not included in the restriction. So we see technically, even meat, there's no restriction on meat, according to the Gemara, for the whole 9 days. Only the Suda Mafsekes, if you're having it after Chatzos. So that just puts things in a little bit of perspective. And so all of the of what we do are chumras which have piled on over the generations, which of course we keep whenever we can. So want to begin. So really there are a number of stages. We've got the 3 weeks. Then we have from Rosh Chodesh, which is coming up Tuesday night, Wednesday, right? We're almost finished with the 3 weeks. And then we're going to have the week of Tisha B'Av, which is going to start next Sunday. And then there's Erev Tisha B'Av, and then there's Tisha B'Av. And they quote Rav Soloveitchik, which was Brisk. Brisk is very into putting everything in categories, and Rav Soloveitchik said that it really, the halachas of each period follow the time of a regular oval, God forbid, right? There's the 3 weeks period, which when we say 3 weeks, it's not actually the entire 3 weeks, but we mean from Shivas Arba Tammuz until Rosh Chodesh. That is like the 12 months of a mourner, which 12 months a person is mourning after his parents. So that kind of symbolizes that. It's not going to fit in 100%. Then from Rosh Chodesh, it would be like a person who's in Shloshim, which is in the 30 days of mourning. And he moves on, and he tries to explain some of the halachas like that, so how it gets progressively more machmir. So one of the mechaber, so there are many, many differences between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. Sfardim are much more makel, right? They follow the rulings of the mechaber, the Beit Yosef, the Yosef Cairo. So he's a lot more makel, and Ashkenazim follow the Ramah. The Ramah is much more machmir, right? There's only one case in the whole Siman Tuf Kuf Nun Aleph where the Ramah is more machmir than the Mechaber. There's one case. The first person which gets the answer, send it to Rabbi Spoo Barber, and the Koil will send you a prize. You'll be given a prize. First person, the one case the Ramah is more machmir than the Mechaber. Okay, that's a bit of a trivia question there for the scholars, the Talmidei Chachamim, which you're following. Okay, but so the Ramah, there's very little which the Mechaber Yosef Cairo actually mentions Shivas Arba Tammuz. Most of it is where the Ramah pushes it up. But we're going to begin with this first case, which is the very end of the Siman. The Ramah says, "Toiv li zor miloi mar shechianu bein hametzarim." It's proper that one should refrain from saying shechianu during Beit HaMetzarim on a pri or on a malbush, on a fruit or on a new garment. But it says, the Mechaber says, if it's on a pidyon ben, you don't have to al yachmetz mitzvahs. For a pidyon ben, don't miss the opportunity for the mitzvah, right? And then that's what Shulchan Aruch says, and the Ramah says so too. If there's a new fruit and it's not going to be around after Tisha B'Av, then you could have that as well. Now, where does this come from? The Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch is using a funny expression, Tov li zaher. It's good to refrain. What do you mean good to refrain? Usually something is usher, something is mutter. Why is it being said in this? It's better to refrain. Okay, so that's based on the Beis Yosef quotes this. The source of this from the Sefer Chassidim. The Sefer Chassidim says from Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says you shouldn't make shechianu, but then he quotes the Maril says unless it's something there's a mitzvah opportunity you're going to miss, then for sure you wouldn't want to forgo that mitzvah. For example, pidyon ben. Right, a pidyon ben comes, hopefully that's a once in a lifetime thing. If a person has a child has a pidyon ben, a shechianu is made, you're not going to want to. If the pidyon ben, the 30th day comes in the 3 weeks. So you're not going to be machmitz, that's mitzvah. You don't want to lose that opportunity. And so the Ramah extends that. So too, eating a fruit also, to make a bracha on a fruit is also a mitzvah. You don't want to miss that opportunity. So what's the reason why we don't make shechianu, right? So comes along the Maggid Avraham and says, it's not, and this will a little bit set the tone. It's not about, people assume it's about avelos. It's because it's mourning, right? It's not good for a mourner to make a shechianu. Right, and we're all mourning for the Beis Hamikdash. They quote the Malachtim. They quote that Rav Shlomo Auerbach. He didn't like it. He said people are always coming and asking for heterim for different things for the 3 weeks. He says they don't ask for heterim when it comes to their parents. If they're mourning for their parents, they don't ask for for these heterim to cut the hair, to shave. He says, why in the base of Mikdash? Why are they looking for leniencies here? But so says the Magen Avram, it's not about Avelis. The reason why we don't make Shechianu, why the Shulchan Aruch says to refrain from making Shechianu, is not about mourning. And he says in the proof that it says in the Gemara in Brachos, and it's brought in the Shulchan Aruch rules this way, that if God forbid a person lost his parent, right? So they make the bracha they make is Baruch Dayan Ha'emes. And what if they were left $3 billion, right? Tens of properties in Turek, right, have been bequeathed to them. So right afterwards they make Shechianu, right? So they make Shechianu right afterwards. So the Magen Avram says, clear thing. It's a clear din that you're allowed to make Shechianu, which is why the Vilna Gaon, right, in the Bir Hagra on the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch, he right away says, the Magen Avram, he says, there's no issue. It's a clear din. A mourner is allowed to make Shechianu. There's no issue to make Shechianu. The Magen Avram says, no. You know why we don't want to make Shechianu? Because what do we say in the Nusach? Shehigianu lizman hazeh. Where we're thanking Hashem that we've reached lizman hazeh. Says the Magen Avram, lizman hazeh, this is a zman of puranos. This is not a happy time. This is a very sad time. And therefore, we want to refrain from saying the nusach of this bracha, shehigianu lizman hazeh, because it's a zman of puranos. And so that's the psak of the Magen Avram. Now, not everyone agrees. Right away, the Taz, so we said the Vilna Gaon argues, and the Taz argues. And the Taz says, well, hey, he heard there was from Yosef Katz, which was in Krakow, he heard a svar, he said the svar, you know what? So Shulchan Aruch says for a mitzvah, if it's for a mitzvah, then you're allowed to make it, because you don't want to be machmitz the mitzvah. You don't want to. So he says, how do you know you're going to be away? You're gonna hold off for making the shechianu until after the 9 days. Who says you're going to be alive after the 9 days? He says for the same reason it says not to be machmitz the mitzvah. Maybe by pushing it off, who knows, right? We never know when we're going to go. God forbid, chas v'shalom. So he says, therefore, the Taz says, and he brings the same svara. It's brought in Hilchos Chol HaMoed, right? The Gemara brings, or I think whatever. It's brought to svara. If you find Adam, right? If you need Adam to sign, you don't push it off. Oh, you know, you're not supposed to write in Chol HaMoed. We'll have them sign afterwards. No, you do chaperai now because you don't know what's going to be afterwards. And so the Taz says, therefore, you can make shechianu because who knows what's going to be afterwards. But nonetheless, we don't rule like the Taz. I guess for us, for Chassidic Chabad, so we have what it says in Hayoim Yoim, that the minig is we do not make shechianu the entire 3 weeks, including Shabbos, even though it's machloikes about Shabbos, right? Some poskim are mekel, we're machmir. I mean, the Mishnah Berurah says, listen, if the Vilna Gaon says he's not worried about the whole thing, so at least for Shabbos you don't have to be machmir. So we are machmir even on Shabbos, when that's following the Arizal, I think. So we don't say shechianu the whole 3 weeks, right? Unless, once again, unless, of course, a person has a pidyon of ben, they discuss a bris milah. So the Sfardim make shechianu by the bris. We don't make shechianu by the bris, even though there's different customs. Some Ashkenazim in Eretz Yisrael even make shechianu by the bris. Okay. So here comes. So how is this related to Corona, right? So we have to relate things with our Leben mit der Zeit. They live with the times. So a discussion which is some of the poskim and this have brought, and this was from the beginning, is what happens if you see your friend okay. What happens if you see a person which you have not seen for 30 days, right? So Shulchan Aruch says, if you have, this is in Siman Reish Chaf Hei, if you have not seen a friend, right, for 30 days, it's based on the Gemara Brachos, then you make shechianu. You haven't seen someone for 12 months, Mechai Mesim. So the poskim say, Mechai Mesim we don't make, but many poskim say we do make shechianu today. Now there are a lot of poskim, the Munkacher says like this, so when we discussed this earlier in another shir about a month ago, that we don't make in the Minchas Elazar Sefer, what's it called? Nimuki or Chaim says, well, I don't make it today because you know what? I know when I went to shul after a long time, I hadn't seen so many people, and you're going to make shechianu. You're going to have to make shechianu every person you've seen because you haven't seen people, and some people you're not really happy to see them, right? So you don't really mean it. If you don't mean it, it's a bracha levatala, but you're going to feel that you have to make it because the other person will be offended. So there are poskim which say we don't make shechianu if you have not seen a person after 30 days, but Rav Avadia, he says his psak is that we still say it. So someone to say, if you would, let's say a person people have not seen their parents, right? Their children, someone who they're really close with. Some people, they might have not seen their spouse for 30 days, right? Because isolation and this and that, maybe they were stuck overseas. So some of the poskim would say that one would be allowed, if they, really meant it and they really said the bracha. There's I think it's a Rivash, which says there's it's never really a bracha levatala by shechianu if you mean it, because if you mean it, you mean it. You had the emotion. Especially to point out, if we have new fruits, we make shechianu. Yet, so anyway, so that is one corona-related halacha, right? That the poskim say if one saw somewhere where they really had the emotion and they hadn't seen it for 30 days, then based on this concept of you don't want to be machmitz the mitzvah, then one could make the shechianu then. But once again, many poskim say the minig is we don't make the shechianu today, but if one really felt it and they made it, it definitely would not be a bracha levatala, and because they wouldn't be able to make it, wait after Tisha B'Av, right, till I see the next time. Well, that wouldn't work. Okay, so that's related to the 3 weeks. That's now another. Okay, so that's about the shechianu. Now, we'll start. I guess we'll go through. I'll seder Shulchan Aruch from the beginning. Okay, because there's so much here. We have Sif Beis speaks about we're mematin b'masomatan, so we decrease in a building. So Sif Beis is from Rosh Chodesh, from Sunday, we decrease from masomatan with binyan shel simcha. So there's the Mishnah Berurah discusses. Well, when it says we're mematin b'masomatan, we decrease in business and binyan shel simcha. Is it any business? What type of business do we decrease in? Is it all business or just business related to simcha? So the Mishnah Berurah says the minig is, and people should know, we don't have the Alter Rebbe for these dinim. So that's why people, besides the big Shulchan Aruch, we learn the Mishnah Berurah, many people. So basically, it's understood, the poskim say, that it's not, you don't have to be mamait in business. Everyone should have lots of business now, especially if you're in the business of selling masks. Then you're going to be booming with business. But but binyan shel simcha, it's only of simcha. So therefore, like if a person was doing construction now, right, the government, they're giving special grants for building grants, right? So that might be like a davar of it, right? But I don't think you have to do it right now yet. But so if a person is doing basic construction for their dwelling, that's allowed. If they're doing for extension for overcrowded apartment, your house is, there's not enough space, that's allowed. If you're making a swimming pool, a vacation home, so that would be binyan shel simcha, right? The question, if you're making a private mikveh, that would probably be binyan shel, one of these pools, which is very complicated and not necessarily suggesting for people to do that, but that would, if it would be doing for mitzvah, that would not be binyan shel simcha. Although if you haven't been for mikveh for a long time, it would be a big simcha. If one builds, so the poskim say, if it's quote the Dvar Yeshua, if that's his parnasa, right? Even if he builds, then that would not be a issue of building. If the person hired a goy before the 9 days and the goy insists on working, so he's doing al daita denafshe, that's okay. Now there's an interesting sefer which came out in the past few years called Masoras Moshe. They're quoting the stuff one of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's grandsons wrote down everything for a number of years, and they started printing it. It's very interesting. So they asked Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, what about mowing the lawn? Would that be, because it says you're not binyan shel simcha, it brings planting and netiyah shel simcha. So he said like this: mowing the lawn is not binyan shel simcha, right? Even if you're not planting flowers, they don't look so nice right away. If you have a beautiful garden, then that would be a binyan shel simcha. But if it's not so beautiful and you're just keeping it kempt, you're just mowing the lawn. So he said, even during the 9 days, that would not be binyan shel simcha. Okay, music. Let's say music. We'll save music for the end. We'll move on to Sif. That's Sif Base, Sif Gimel, and we're going on following the Seder Shulchan Aruch and Taf Guf and Aleph. So, as we mentioned, and the Gemara says in the week of Tisha B'Av, it's Asur L'Saper L'Chabas. So for Sfardim out there, the only restriction on getting a haircut is going to be from this Sunday. The only restriction on laundry is from this Sunday from Rosh Chodesh. But for Ashkenazim, so when it comes to haircuts, so the Ramaz Machmir from Shivas B'Tammuz, right? And when it comes to laundry, it will be from Rosh Chodesh, as we know this. So someone asked the question right away, about women. Does a restriction apply for women? So for women, if it's anything to do with tznius, then it's allowed, right? But even they say for women, it's better before. But if they're having a hard time keeping it under the sheitel, under the tichel, so then they are allowed to get a haircut, right? Definitely before, if they didn't do it before the beginning of the 3 weeks, it's better to do it before the week of Tisha B'Av, because that's when it's usher according to the Gemara. Right? Keep in mind, the only thing mentioned in the Gemara, the restrictions, are haircuts and laundry. Okay, so that's about haircuts. So now one of the things one of the things we have to relate this to a little bit to Corona. Now this should not be relevant to anyone, hopefully, at this year, but in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of the poskim have discussed during the 3 weeks. It's boiling hot there, and they have to wear masks now as of Wednesday. I think we're going to have to start wearing masks when we go out here as well. So the poskim discuss: is one allowed to shave, to trim their beard in order to keep the masks on? And so a lot of them, there's a so what is it? Okay, so there's a Rabbi Ratzon Arusi. He's the rabbi of the city of Kiryat Ono, and he said, listen. He said, well, I put the mask fits on my face. He has a beard. He's got a beard. He said, it fit on my beard. But him and other poskim, they quote Yaakov Ariel as well. They said, listen, if these are all Mizrahi rabbis, they said, if it's really, if you can't do it, they don't suggest it. But if it's a question of that, or they're not going to wear the mask, they said, well, you got to wear the mask. Yeah. So, but obviously we follow the Tzemach Tzedek, and according to Tzemach Tzedek, it's a non-negotiable, the beard. So it's not anyway. We haven't been wearing it here. So if it's uncomfortable, I guess stay at home. Don't go outside. If it's cold outside anyway. So that's one of the issues that the poskim have discussed. Now this is related to Sfira Soimer right after Pesach, in the beginning of Sfira, but it's related now as well. So Yitzchak Yosef was the chief Sephardi rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, now the Rishon LeZion. He wrote a very nice tshuva about, you had someone who was sick, or they were in isolation and they couldn't get a haircut before Yom Tov, and are they allowed to get it during Sfira, right? So he went in Siman Tov Kuf Lamed Aleph. What about a person to get their haircut during Chol HaMoed? So it says in Tov Kuf Lamed Aleph, it says in Sif Beis, the Mechaber says, a person was sick and he couldn't get a haircut before Chol HaMoed because he was sick. So then before Yom Tov, then on Chol HaMoed, he's not allowed to get a haircut. But then it says if he was in jail before Yom Tov and he got let out on Chol HaMoed, he's allowed to get a haircut. So right away, the poskim can discuss, well, how come when he was sick and he gets better, he can't get a haircut on Chol HaMoed, but he was in jail, he is. So the Mishnah Berurah gives the answer. Well, if he was in jail, everyone knows about it. It's Yidua L'Rabim, but if it was just sick, it's not Yidua L'Rabim. Not everyone's going to realize, hey, why this guy get a haircut? They're not going to realize he was sick. But if he was in jail, everyone knows that he was honest, he was under duress. He quotes a second answer. The Emek of Melech says, well, when he was sick, it was the ikuv, it was mitzido, it was from his, it was kind of his fault. But when he was in jail, there was someone else holding him back from getting the haircut. So, and anyway, and there are other poskim quotes the Bati Knesius, other poskim Bechlal, they argue on the Mechaber anyway. They quote Rishonim, which argue. So he says, well, in this case, if a person was in a situation that they couldn't get the haircut because they were in isolation or whatever it was, and now it's the so the oinus, you have both cases. Everyone knows about the oinus. It was not his fault. It was the Misrad Briut. It was the health department, and it's meforsim. Everybody knows about it, and it's mukha milsa, and therefore he gave a heter during Sfiras Omer. So l'chora, that heter would definitely apply during the 3 weeks as well if a person couldn't get it before, but once and even after Rosh Chodesh, up till the week of Tisha B'Av, because once it comes to the week of Tisha B'Av, which is not a big deal because it's only between from Sunday till Thursday, right, evening, right? That's when the Gemara, that's one of the few things the Mishnah says you shouldn't get a haircut. But, okay. And l'chora, that applies to, now what about when it comes to, so there's a famous Igros Moshe that he was asked about, this is Orach Chaim Daled, about what about shaving for the beard, right? Shaving the beard off, and once again, for us, it shouldn't be relevant, but for people who are somech on the Mekilim, who are lenient about shaving, he said it's about, he says, up till the week of Tisha B'Av, the same idea, because everything till the week of Tisha B'Av, it's a minhag. I mean, there are minhagim which are recorded in Shulchan Aruch, but once it's something which is mentioned in the Mishnah, the Gemara, then it's kind of non-negotiable. Okay, obviously, but just for Hefsid Parnasa, so he was makel till the week of Tisha B'Av. So l'chora, even that heter, now so many people are working from home. So, and anyway, so things have changed. That heter was given in the 60s, and now it's like lots of people have beards, even people who are non-Jews have beards. So, because that's about, now what about laundry? So that's about getting haircuts. So about laundry, so when we mentioned, according to the Spartim, it's only the week of Tisha B'Av from Sunday. From us, it's going to be from Rosh Chodesh. We are not supposed to do laundry, right? And there's a machloikas in the Gemara between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. We paskin like Rav Sheshes that even to do laundry, you're not going to wear it. We're not supposed to do any laundry, and we're not supposed to wear cleanly laundered clothing, and so are things any different this year because of the corona? So a psak came out. There are piskei corona that have come up every few weeks from Rabbi Herschel Schechter, and they're online. You can Google piskei corona or YU Torah. They have them, and they're very interesting. And so one of the recent psakim that he gave out is he says if you have a doctor that goes to the hospital and they have to do their laundry all the time because they don't want to get infected, so then they could wash their clothing even during the 9 days, where according to the Gemara it's not allowed because they're worried about sakana. And he said there, hu hadin, to someone, if someone has a lot of anxiety and they're worried about it, then they could do laundry. But I spoke to a doctor right before the shir, and he was a little bit hesitant. He said, this doctor, so I'm not going to say the name of the doctor, but he said he wears the same pair of pants. He doesn't change his pants every single day. And there's a machloikus whether the droplets really, okay, I'm not getting into that. But if a person is concerned, then there is a heter to do laundry for that. But if they don't need to, then we have to remember this is one of the few things which are mentioned definitely the week of Tisha B'Av to not do any to try to avoid doing laundry. If one needs to, so they can. We're obviously for children, so we have the heterim for people who have little children. That's different. But once again, sometimes people are very makel on the laundry, and was just reading in the Sefer Masoras Moshe. Someone asked Moshe about, just like you have if someone, we're going to get to bathing soon, but you have a person who's an istinus, which has a heter to bathe. So he said, what about wearing cleanly laundered clothing. So does that apply as well? So Rabbi Moshe said yes. Then they said, what about doing laundry? Rabbi Moshe said, laundry. That's mamash aser, the laundry. So he didn't like the laundry. So if it could be avoided, one should avoid it. But once again, if they're a healthcare worker and they have to wash their clothing, the uniforms and all that, they can. So this is going to be relevant now with the masks. So could one wash the masks? So if you're going to buy the masks which need to be washed, so if they need to be washed, that would be like the mitpeches yadayim, the hand towels, and there would be a heter to wash them. But once again, it's better to avoid trying to do the laundry. Let's move on. The next inyan, let's speak about meat. Okay, let's speak about meat. Let's jump till siftes. One second. Okay, so in siftes, so we have about basar. Let's speak about eating meat, right? So as we mentioned before, the real isser is only to eat meat on the Suda Mafsekes. So there are different minhagim. So the Gemara does not mention anything about eating meat from. It does mention there's famous Gemara Bava Basra where they wanted to, because of Churban Beis Hamikdash, that we should never eat meat anymore. Everyone should be vegetarians. But at the end, the Gemara rejected that. So in Siftes, the Mechaber says there are those which are noyeg to refrain from eating meat and drinking wine only the week of Tisha B'Av, which would mean from this coming Sunday, right? There are those yesh moisifim. There are those that add, they restrict eating meat from Rosh Chodesh, right? And there are those that add from Shivas of Tammuz, right? From Shivas of Tammuz, they don't have meat, which of course, okay, we know definitely we are not that machmir, right there. I don't know anyone that refrains except the vegetarians. They from Shivas of Tammuz. Okay, but the minhag is to refrain from Rosh Chodesh to not have meat, right? Some of the cases, the whole Chidah, the Chidah says you can have meat on Rosh Chodesh, but for Ashkenazim, from Rosh Chodesh, we don't have meat. So then the Ramah says, not only that, Matznim Rosh Chodesh ve'elach hasakin. We put away the sakin shel shchita. We don't even shecht. We don't shecht unless it's for a tzorech mitzvah or a choila or for Shabbos or a meal, a bris or a pidyon ben. What meat is included in the prohibition? So the Mechaber says this is in Sif Yud. He says, well, yesh mishoimer. Some say that those that you don't have meat, but you could have something was cooked with meat. So a potato from the cholent, which is called a tavshil, that was cooked with basar, right? That would be okay. But you could not have basar oif. Poultry is not allowed. And even though we meant basar belua, okay. So it includes chicken, but nonetheless, the Mishnah Berurah says the minhag is we don't have a tavshil shel basar. The minhag is we don't have even a potato that was cooked with the meat. We would not eat. However, if something was cooked, the Mishnah Berurah says in a fleshik bowl, that would be fine. You're not going to say that would be called, even if not that you cooked rice, par of rice in a fleshik bowl, there is no issue with that. And so too, if a little bit of meat fell in, he said it will be batal b'shishim, that's okay. So, okay, about eating the meat. So nonetheless, the pois can bring that the Mishnah Berurah says if a person is a choila, let me just find where this is. For a choila, it's okay. So the Mishnah Berurah says, how sick do they have to be to have meat? He says, even choila ksas, right? Even a little bit choila, right? They're allowed to have meat. A person doesn't have to be really meat. Where he says it's better that from Zion Ba'av to be machmir, and if they don't have to have basar, then it's better if they would have chicken. But a person does not have to be that choila to have meat. So the question now to relate is, first off, one practical case that I heard directly. This is from Rav David Yosef in his weekly shir. He gave an example of this. He said for a choila is that, let's say you have a person which had corona. We know one of the symptoms is they lose their appetite. So they're not well, right? And they can't eat anything. And if the only way you could lure them to eat is you could say, listen, Do you want some beans? I said, no, I'm not hungry. Do you want rice? No. Well, Yankel, can I make you your favorite steak? I guess so. So he says that's a tzorech choila, right? If the only thing you can get him to eat is if you tell him there's barbecue, so that would be okay, right? But hopefully there's no one in our community is having symptoms like this or has it at all, and that everyone should stay healthy. But one of the things I was discussing with a doctor earlier is what happens if a person, so we know there are people which they have they're low immune systems and they're more at risk, right? So would they be allowed to have meat to keep up their immune system? So I was doing a little bit of Googling here, and so one of the studies they brought says there was a clinical study done by the University of Graz that vegetarians get sick more often. They have a lower quality of life than omnivores, and they have greater likelihood. And it goes on they get sick more often, and eating meat is crucial in supporting immune deficiencies. Okay, so anyway, it goes on and on how important eating meat is. So it could be, and if a person, they would be put, by not eating meat, they would be put in a compromised situation, right? Then, like the doctor said, one example, even not connected with, could be a person with diabetes, right? So eating carbohydrates could be, could be dangerous, and eating meat is healthier for them. So a person, even choylek tzas, they're allowed to have meat. So but a person has to speak with a doctor and with a rav to know what's the right thing to do, because Hashem wants everyone to stay healthy. But nonetheless, a thing that Rav David Yosef, this is one of the sons of Rav Avad Yosef, so he's the one that put out the Sefer Halacha Berurah. One of the things he mentions is all the heterim they bring, for people who need for protein to have meat. He says fish. Many times eating a certain fish could do the same thing, but it could be if a person, some people don't eat fish, they just can't stomach it. So anyway, there are heterim for those people who need it to have the meat. Now, what's interesting on the Ramah that says that we don't shecht, we put away, we're matzniah the sakin, we don't shecht. So there's an interesting, the Sefer Sh'ar Mitzion Balacha, Rav Broim, right? The whole story about this with the Rebbe. Anyway, not for now, but he quotes an interesting, and this is on, once again, we have to mention it. Today we're Or L'Chavches Sivan, Tammuz, and it's the Yortzeit of Shlomo Ganzfried, right? Which is the author of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And so, we'll say it now. So here's the Sefer Sh'ar Mitzion Balacha. It's 4 volumes, and so it's on the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So, and he writes lots of different kulas. The Rebbe told Moshe Feller, Rav Moshe Feller, the Shliach, that it's a collection of kulas, but when he has a chumrah, it's very solid. But he brings what the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says, that the minig b'chol Yisrael, not to eat meat, not to drink wine during the 9 days, right until after Tisha B'Av. And so on this, that it says we're matzniah the side, we put away the knife. So he quotes the Sefer Harei B'Samim, says if you're in a big city where you have many oichle treifus, you have many people don't keep kosher, and they'll eat treif if they can't find kosher, you're allowed to shecht and you're allowed to sell, right? And he says in order to be matzil people from eating treifus, and he says one should not be machmir if we'll bring a michshel to the rabbim, if we'll bring the public to stumble. And he says that's why we're makel today, that we shops sell roasted chicken. Even restaurants sell to whoever it is, right? Anyone who wants to come, and that's one reason. One reason is we want to be matzil people. We're going to be machmer like the Ramah when there are people who are going to eat treif. And the second reason he says, and this is really relevant to now, another tliya is that maybe they're buying it for Shabbos, maybe they're buying for a Sudas Mitzvah, and maybe the person is a choila, right? Many persons are choila, and that's another thing to keep in mind, right? People, we have to have a limud schus that, maybe people want to keep up their immune systems and they don't, God forbid, want to catch any corona and they want to stay nice and healthy. And so this is anyway, I'm extending his words. Once again, no one should eat meat unless the doctors tell them that they think they need it and they should speak to their Rav. But he says that's another tliya why we can sell meat, because it's for choila, and he goes on, and it's quite interesting that the heter he brings, and he goes on to say even if it's at the restaurant, because we don't know what situation there is. We have to be malamed schus on people. So that's about eating meat. Okay, so now another issue, which is relevant for people, is it's brought down, and we're going to move back one sif to sifches. Sifches, the Mechaber says, Neshed and Nehigi de Leila Mishti. So women have the custom not to sew or not to knit, right? And that is based on a Yerushalmi, right? Not to knit. Now, so this is an issue, right? Because many people are going out of their minds, and people are going bonkers because they're not supposed to leave their house and they don't have what to do. And so there are about not knitting. So there are a few. So we have a few heterim here. Second. Okay, so we have a few heterim here. So number one. Okay. Anyway, number one, someone. So there's a sefer here called Urach Halacha, which is by the a Belzer Dayan in Eretz Yisrael. What is the word? Shevet, yeah. They wrote Shevet Kahasi. So he brings that if a person is going, if they need to do knitting for their nerves, right? Then it's allowed until the week of the Shavuot Shechal B'Tisha B'Av, right? Up to the Shavuot Shechal B'Tisha B'Av. Reb Moshe was asked about this. He says, listen, if it's better not to, but it says if it's going to save them from speaking Lashon Hara, if they're not going to have what to do and they're going to speak Lashon Hara, then you can, embroidering. He says you can allow them to embroider. So a local talent is somewhat local. So in the Sefer B'Tzela Chachma, this is Chelik Dalet Siman and Dalet, he has a very long tshuva about this. Someone asked him about knitting, sewing, and this was for schools. It's interesting because in America they don't really have school. Maybe it was for camps, but anyway. But about during the 9 days, and he says, he didn't feel comfortable being matir and isser, right? Just being matir and isser, because the question was, well, if we don't let them do this, then the girls are going to do something even worse, right? So he didn't feel so comfortable just knocking out completely. But he says, if you're worried, nonetheless, he says, if there's a chashash karev, that through this, they'll come to a verois yoiser chamurois, right? Now, let's say you're trying to keep your kids busy, right? Could be even boys, girls. You're trying to keep them busy at home. And, if they're not going to be doing this, and who knows what they're going to be doing, they could be doing things much worse. So he says, it's kfi rois ein amora. He says he's going to leave it up to the Rav, but he doesn't want to just say, it doesn't apply this year. He feels uncomfortable with that. But anyway, he speaks about this in great detail, that, he says, try to find other things they could do, try to increase the hours before Rosh Chodesh, or at least, just the week of Tisha B'Av, to try to avoid. But anyway, there are heterim if a person needs the knitting to stay sane. Okay, so that's about the knitting. Moving on to another in here, as we have. Okay, so moving on. That was Siftes. Okay, we didn't speak about fingernails. Okay, so fingernails. Okay, many times there could be lots of bacteria, right? And who knows how these things could have these diseases could be contracted through everyone. We're washing our hands, and definitely we didn't speak about the issue of rechitza yet. We have to do rechitza, but on Shulchan Aruch says asur l'saper u'lechabes. So on the words l'saper, to get a haircut, so there's always a lot of confusion about cutting the fingernails. So cutting the fingernails, there's a machloikis. According to the Taz, you shouldn't cut your fingernails. The Magen Avraham is Michoel, and the Mishnah Berurah says that the Mishnah Berurah says yesh deus ben achronim, and he says you could be Michoel erev Shabbos l'tzorech mitzvah. So I just read just over Shabbos, Rav Hankin, famous posek in America. Rav Hankin said, someone asked him about the Mishnah Berurah. He says he was the tzaddik of the generation, but not the posek of the generation. Because a tzaddik, he said he's too machmir. He's too machmir. He always wants to be choshish. So to the stringent opinion. So anyway, so in the Sefer Masoros Moshe, he was asked about cutting fingernails during the 9 days. He says, even during Avelis, he says, no problem. So anyway, there is a machloikus about cutting the fingernails, but definitely if a person would be worried, if they feel, they can't take it, and especially they're worried about bacteria, then there would be very strong grounds to be Michoel, like the Magen Avraham. And Rabbi Moshe says, you can be Michoel cutting the fingernails. Okay, so let's speak about rechitza. So we have, so rechitza, bathing. So in Shulchan Aruch, right, in the Gemara, it mentions nothing about the restriction of bathing during the 9 days. Of course, it mentions on Tisha B'Av, but not the 9 days. So they say like this. So I'm going to just read. There's a sefer called Shulchan Alevi. This is from Rav Belsky, Alav Shalom, who was a posek for the OU. I think he was a Rosh Yeshiva Torah Vodaas. So he has a nice tshuva about this, and he says the Isser of the rechitza, we only find it in the Rishonim by the Ravya. The Ravya writes, Nagu avusenu shaloi lirchoitz. Our forefathers have the minhag not to wash from Rosh Chodesh, and he says v'yesh aleinu l'kayim mishum al titush Torah simecha. Right? We have to keep it because we shouldn't forsake the custom of your mother. And he says, however, it's only rechitza shel tainug. Yeah, and that's what they asked, rechitza shel tainug. But he goes on, and this is not his chiddush. A lot of people speak about this. But if there's lichluch, if one is dirty, if one is sweating, and so he can wash even with soap. But he says, but it should just do bezrizas. He says, don't stay in the shower, don't do more than what's necessary, right? Because once again, the reason why, he says, what's the reason why the poskim they added new things? He says because they didn't want, because he says like this. He says the idea of rechitza is, it says misha nichnas av matim b'simcha, right? So Chazal say, they want us to feel the tzar for the churban. So the things mentioned to limit, to not do netiyah shel simcha, we don't have a lot of things the Gemara is mentioning. But bathing, right, we do have. So they wanted we should be mitzvah. So if a person's going to stay in the shower for a long time, then they're missing the whole point. And also Sharm B'Tzon Halacha also speaks about a person's. So Sharm B'Tzon Halacha, Rav Broin, he says just don't make it the water. It doesn't have to be really cold. It could be poishrim, which poishrim is if it's body temperature, that's fine. But once again, also in the poiskim can bring people who are concerned for the corona and they want to stay healthy. They want to stay, and they feel that especially people, healthcare workers, then there is a heter and whatever it takes. But once again, for people who don't need it, right, they should not bathe, only for cleanliness, but not beyond that, because we should feel mitzvah for the churban. Okay, another Indian now. Okay, we only have a few more minutes, so let's go. One of the big ones here is music, right? So let's speak about music. So there was, everyone's heard this already, but we know Shulchan Aruch does not actually say you're not allowed to listen to music. It says in the beginning you're not supposed to have rikudim u'mechoilos, dancing, but the poskim extend from dancing. If you're not allowed to dance, then you're not allowed to have music as well. And the consensus of the poskim is all that includes even music which is a lav dafka from a live instrument, but even from a not only live instrument, but from tapes. Let me just find where I put this. Okay. Okay, so Yitzchak Yosef, he wrote, he gave a psak about this. Just Chaim Kanievsky just came out with a psak about this. Anyone who's found in what's it called? A person who's found in isolation, they were both matir music. However, neither of them were just said this year the Isser on music does not apply, right? But many of the poskim said if a person is feeling depressed or something, then they can listen to music, even music which has with not only a cappella, because a cappella all year round, usually a cappella is a machloikis, a Rav Belsky in the Sefer Shulchan Levi. He's quite machmer about a cappella. Other poskim are makel about a cappella, but they said this year, people are makel about, even people who usually are machmer on a cappella are more makel, but for a person who is needs simcha and mental health is very important, then so there's a heter to listen even to music which causes one to dance. Now there's a heter all year, I guess, Bechlal, they quote Shlomo Auerbach says that it's only music which is going to cause a person to dance, right? And that's one approach. So classical music, nigunim, even with background music, which don't cause a person to dance. So that is one shita. So he's mekel, right? But a lot of the poskim are machmir that anything with instruments you shouldn't listen to. But this year, people who need it to stay besimcha, then it's allowed. So I want to conclude. Okay, we have another couple minutes. So, and whenever they discuss music, bisman is that there's a tshuva of the Marshag. So the Marshag in Simon Kuf Chaf Hey, and he was from Shimon Greenfeld, a famous Hungarian poisek, and he was asked about music. And he writes there that because of after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, he writes about atzvus. He says how bad atzvus is. Atzvus is an awful thing, and atzvus, depression, brings a person to many averus. And he says, and he quotes, even atzvus, depression on averus, is not good. Even a person's his atzvus is because for his averus, his sins. He says loy toivu. Like it says in Likutei Amarim, right? Like he quotes Tanya, which is very unique, right? A Hungarian poisek is quoting Tanya, and he says it could bring a person afilu lidei ma'abed atzmoi ladas. He says atzvus on a person's sins, in a person's spiritual situation, could, God forbid, bring a person to suicide. And it's a very serious thing because, once again, the mental health is a very serious issue. Therefore, he concludes, he says, someone, he's old, betivoy, if his nature, he's prone towards atzvus, chas v'shalom, then there's no issue if he listens to music, right? If he's doing it to take away his tsar, to take away his discomfort, but he goes on to say, but it all depends on the person asking. It's really a subjective question, right? And he goes on to say, he finishes off the tshuva, which is also a beautiful piece. He says, before I got married, right, I spoke to my, he was a Talmud of Maram Shik. He was like a Talmud Muvik of the Maram Shik. The Maram Shik told me, you should know that, he says like this. He said, whenever you go to a Suda something, you're going to go to a Suda mitzvah, you don't think you have to go, because sometimes you'll go and you'll regret going. Why do I have to go there? Wasted a whole night. But he says, as man sitzt und man lernt, hat man kein Mal nicht kein charata. But the Maram Shik told me, when you sit and you learn, you never regret. In other words, a person's never going to be like, you know what? I just spent 2 hours learning Gemara. I just wasted my time. He says, you're never going to have charata when you learn. So if that does it for you, so if the simcha of learning, then you don't have to. But once again, and also in the weekly shir of Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, he also spoke again about music during Sfira, and he says even a person who learns, some people, they can't just learn, they're in isolation and they can't just learn and learn and learn and learn. They need a little bit of music, of simcha. So he said, then that's okay. But if you could channel your simcha through learning, that would be better. But if a person needs the music, and for sure if a person has kids around, and for kids to learn with the music, and even he's with a quick beat, then that is okay. And we should all stay very, very healthy. One last issue, is one allowed to buy the masks? So now everyone has to buy masks. Can you buy masks during the 3 weeks? So that's another machlok. We started off about shechianu, right? The Shulchan Aruch says we don't make shechianu during the 3 weeks. So when it comes to buying, one of the big issues, can you buy clothes? So you definitely cannot buy clothes from Rosh Chodesh. From Shivas Rebbe Tammuz is a machlokas. Some say the only reason why you can't buy clothes is because shechianu. If we don't make shechianu, then there's no issue of buying clothes. So that's the approach. Moshe Feinstein, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, learn like that. Therefore, you could buy right now, if you need to buy something, so you could buy it and wear it because you're not going to make shechianu on it, right? But there's also El Yerabba's machbir, just buying itself as a simcha, right? But then Rosh Chodesh, then they say for sure, even without the shechianu, it's a problem. But one of the reasons is it's about simcha. And Slachora, we could say, first off, there's no choice. We have to buy it anyway. Just like the poskim bring, the Rav Moshe has a tshuva about this, that if you don't have Tisha B'Av shoes, 9 days, I can't buy new shoes. You're going to go barefoot. Of course, if you don't have Tisha B'Av shoes, then you can buy Tisha B'Av shoes, right? So if there's something you mamish need, you're allowed. But if the whole reason, the whole motivation of the Chachamim making this isser of not to buy clothes is because the simcha, no one is having any simcha buying these masks. So you're allowed to buy the masks, unless maybe if you're buying like a Gucci mask. Maybe if you're going to buy a Gucci mask, right, then you're there might be a simcha, right? But anyway, so we should, all these, Yehafchu Yom Elu L'Sasn L'Simcha, and there should be only simcha that we should be Zoichet Mashiach. But in the Chas V'Shalom, in the event that this is still going on, so next week we will have a shir all about the issues of the fast this year, which is fascinating. All right, Zai Gesund, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Stern.
Thank you, Rabbi Stern.
If anyone has any questions they want addressed, then you can send it through during the week, and we'll address them at the part 2 next week. Shkoyach, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Baruch, for organizing. Thank you.
Muito bom.
Shakor.
Okay.